The Pan-African Parliament President Chief Fortune Charumbira says the parliament should be a leading voice in calling for the silencing of the guns in the DRC, Somalia, and many other conflicts on the continent. This came out when Charumbira tabled the performance review of the House. He has laid bare some serious challenges facing the Pan-African Parliament as it seeks to regain its voice. Kailihle Khumalo has more on that.
A house on the brink of a financial storm. The Pan-African Parliament President, Chief Fortune Charumbira, has painted a bleak picture of the challenges facing the House. It's alleged that some funds might have been misused by previous leadership. The African Union has decided to dramatically cut the parliamentary budget. Charumbira says they are going back to basics.
We are working very hard on the image, and I think it is improving. We are getting comments like that. The image of this parliament, that it will improve. And we need to work very hard. One of the issues that led us to bad image is the way we fight or show conflict in this chamber. I think we should all resolve that. We should identify characters that just want to cause problems in this chamber.
Some members of parliament say whoever stole Pan-African Parliament funds should be brought to book.
The issue is that Pan-African Parliament was giving MPs allowance, sitting allowance for the duration of the session that they are attending. But that has since been stopped. And the reasons being that the money was abused by former MPs through the bureau. And those people are known. And that is why now we are not getting the allocation that was supposed to be given to PAP. We are subjected to account for sins that were not committed by us.
The Malabo Protocol that is supposed to give teeth to the Pan-African Parliament came under the spotlight as MPs highlighted why some countries are reluctant to ratify it.
I'm going to limit the term limit in power. I will not allow Museveni to stay for 40 years in power. I will not allow nobody to, those of Kagame, changing constitution for them to stay. I will regulate that one.
The Pan-African Parliament session comes as the continent is facing quite a number of conflicts, from the eastern part of the DRC to the recent terror attacks in Mogadishu, Somalia, and also you still do have the tsunami of coups in West Africa. The issue of peace and security has featured prominently here among the MPs in Midrand. Kailihle Khumalo, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Doctor Mathole Motshekga, member of the Pan-African Parliament Committee, joins us now to talk about some of these issues. A very good evening to you, Dr. Motshekga, and thanks so much for speaking to us. Much appreciated. If we could just start with some of the challenges outlined by the PAP president. Just in your views, what should the Pan-African Parliament be prioritizing, particularly if it has the aim of being a leading voice on certain issues, particularly conflict resolution?
I think that President Charumbira was right to make observations about the bad image that Parliament acquired, especially last year. You remember that there was some physical fighting in Parliament. There were disagreements about the procedures for elections, especially the rotation rule, which brought Parliament to a standstill. But there are also questions of the theft of funds, which means that there was no solid administration. But I think that Parliament, the African Parliament now, that we have a solid leadership under Chief Charumbira, should move on to the real issues and leave these internal problems to the Bureau of Parliament. The real issues are, for instance, the whole question of malnutrition in Africa. You know that this year's theme is building resilience in nutrition on the African continent to accelerate human capital, social and economic development. Now, how do you then go about building resilience without addressing the root causes of the problem in Africa? We are arguing that, African people were granted political freedom without social and economic freedoms. After the decolonization of Ghana and Cuba, the imperialist powers realized that African freedom is unstoppable, and they hurriedly granted independence to their colonies, but imposed liberal constitutions and bills of rights which reserved the rights of the colonial settlers to land and natural resources. And that became the root cause of the impoverishment of Africa. Now, a continent which was a breadbasket of the world from antiquity suddenly has become a continent that cannot feed itself, and with serious consequences, because now Africa has to import food and pay 60 billion for the imported food. Now, this imported food is really not the best quality nutritional food, and as a result, African people are sick. And how do you then develop when you are sick? And apart from the 60 billion that is paid for food imports, then you have a sick population that needs medicines. And then you go back to the West to buy medicines, because our indigenous knowledge systems, which we used to produce food, produce medicines, had been destroyed by the imperialist and colonial forces. So it means that Africa now should not just lament. We should reclaim back our land and the natural resources. We must educate our children. But the problem is also, how do you educate children who are stunted because of hunger and malnutrition? So it means we really have serious problems, and we should move away from debating who stole what money and so on, who mismanaged the system, because those are matters that can be simply referred to the law enforcement officials. And we must now face the real issues, because Africa has 60% of arable land, but this land is in the hands of foreigners who are producing food for Europe and not for us. Okay. We are the labor tenants. We provide the labor to produce the food that is not available to ourselves and our children.
Dr. Motshekga, if we are to create sustainable food systems that would do away with food insecurity and tackle the issue of malnutrition, which you've just raised, we would also then have to deal with the conflicts on the continent. So some of them are driven by that food insecurity, but the conflicts themselves ensure food insecurity. What role can the Pan-African Parliament, through its mandate, play in helping reduce these conflicts? I mean, we had a vision as the African Union of at least silencing half of the conflicts, silencing the guns, ending half of the conflicts by 2020. We're in 2022, and we've seen more coups in the past year on the continent than we thought we'd see.
You know, first and foremost, we should ask ourselves, who produces these guns and the bullets? Because I'm not aware of African countries that have factories to produce these high caliber weapons that are being used in these countries. Who produces the bullets? It is again the imperialist powers who wants to impose leaders of their choice on the African continent, because they do not want leaders who believe in a true political, social, and economic freedom of the African people. They want puppets who will serve the interest of the foreign powers. So there is no way that Africans are going to be able to silence the guns on themselves. All that Africans need to do through the Pan-African Parliament is begin to educate the people that the wars that they are fighting are not their wars. They are somebody's war, and that's why even at the end of those wars, if they do end, the beneficiaries of peace will be the foreigner. And that's why we believe that the education of African people about who they are, where they come from, what is their purpose in this life, and what is their destiny is very important. Because in pre-colonial times, African people were united, they built empires, they traded amongst themselves. There were no wars that were taking place until the slavery was introduced, and foreign powers fought amongst themselves in their efforts to capture slaves. And then our people were taken away. As Nelson Mandela put it, our land became the property of other peoples. Our minerals became the property of other people, and we were reduced into, beneficiaries of charity. So many of these problems that we see, and we blame ourselves and we blame Africa, are actually imported from outside by people who want to control African resources, not for the benefit of African people, but for their own benefit.
Dr. Motshekga, just a quick and final question. What should then be the order of business for the Pan-African Parliament then, say, over the next couple of months?
I believe that we should focus on the right of African people to development. And that right means that we must develop human capital, we must reclaim the land and its natural resources, because without ownership of land and natural resources, social and economic development is impossible. But also, we need to take advantage of the 2021 African Union theme, which says arts, culture, and heritage leave us for building the Africa that we want. Because the majority of African people in rural areas, in the townships, have indigenous knowledge systems which can create wealth for themselves even without going to school. So African governments need to empower these rural people and then help them to preserve and harness this indigenous knowledge system, their heritage, to produce their own wealth and then create markets. If you go to all our airports, you look in the curio shops, you see beautiful artifacts that our people produce, but now they are on sale in the airports, but these people who are selling them take them for nothing from Mpumalanga, from Limpopo, from KwaZulu-Natal, and so on. Now, if government could make those curio shops available to the people and support them, our people could build their own wealth from the arts, culture and heritage, and from agriculture, and so on. So we can and should build our own wealth. So the Pan-African Parliament, as the voice of the people, must advocate for the independence, social and economic independence of our people. And I think not everything is lost. We can still achieve what we want if we educate our people. And then we are even proposing that there should be a Pan-African Institute for Heritage Education, because after having lost the mines, we still have our heritage that we can use to generate wealth.